Nobody scores. Let's go 44 short.
Against Jacobs and the Bills, the AFL's most wide-open offenses were slammed shut. In 1964 and 65, Buffalo gave up the fewest points in the league. During that 2-year span, the Bills went 17 straight games without allowing a rushing touchdown. A pro football record that still stands.
I think it lent itself to the way that Lou Saban wanted to play football. He's going to play defense, and he was going to smack you in the mouth on offense. He was going to run over you.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hello, friends. My name is Tim Hanlon. I welcome you again to our little star-studded extravaganza. We call it Good Seats Still Available, that curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. We thank you for finding us in the wild and woolly podcast world that's out there, and finding us and putting us in your podcatcher, your device, your streaming entity, whatever it is, it's filling your earbuds with good audio sounds. We appreciate you putting us through those pipes and through the air to listen to us. And this week we have a very fun and interesting conversation with a veteran of the AFL and the early days, well, not so early days, but sort of the maturation, I guess, of the NFL. And one of the league's great defensive players. His name is Ron McDole, and his nickname is the Dancing Bear, and that's also the name of his recent autobiography called The Dancing Bear, My 18 Years in the Trenches of the AFL and NFL. And after starring in the University of Nebraska Cornhusker program in the late 1950s, Ron McDole was one of the first group of players to be duly drafted by both the NFL and for the first time ever, the AFL. And we get into the stories of both of those leagues, and in particular for Ron, a very compelling and solid career, especially with the Buffalo Bills, where, as you just heard in that clip from the awesome multi-chapter history called Full Color Football, the history of the American Football League that ran on Showtime a bunch of years ago. The defense, the prowess of the defense of the Buffalo Bills, especially in the middle of the decade, 64, 65 or so, 63 even, 66 even. Ron McDole was one of the key cogs of that awesome defensive unit that won 2 AFL championships, got them to a 3rd championship game, and before sort of the Bills kind of sort of went on the slide as the decade wore on, the Buffalo Bills were absolutely a quintessentially strong and a notable chapter in the brief but very important history of the AFL. Ron was there. Ron was in the trenches. Ron was on the front lines, if you will. And we're going to get into some of those stories. There was a couple of cups of coffee before, finding a niche and a strong toehold in the Buffalo Bills starting lineup, drafted by the St. Louis Football Cardinals of the NFL. We'll talk about that and why he chose the NFL and St. Louis. Recently moved from Chicago versus going to the Denver Broncos of the AFL, fledgling as it might have been. We'll get into that. We'll get into a little bit of the Houston Oilers, where Ron had a cup of coffee, and then we'll sort of talk about the Buffalo Bills in particular. And then we'll end up with sort of almost a rebirth or a rejuvenation of the career after that lengthy and successful Buffalo Bills AFL, then into NFL career with the Washington Redskins of the NFL. Not sort of in our genre per se, because the Redskins still live on in today's NFL, but obviously some great times and stories during the early and mid 1970s with the George Allen years and the Over the Hill Gang. Ron was part of that as well. So all of that is up ahead with our guest, Ron McDole, in just a couple of seconds. And we encourage you to, as always, listen and enjoy. But first, before doing so, your charge in life is to go visit our sponsors and perhaps, if you wouldn't mind, partaking of their wares. We'd appreciate that. We want to thank our friends at Audible, where you can get a free audiobook download, yours to keep. You can cancel the service at any time. And even if you get rid of your device, you can, or cancel your subscription, you can still hold on to that free audiobook. It's yours to keep and listen to for as long as you have that device. And the way to get that is to go to this little website. We call it audibletrial.com/goodseats. Again, audibletrial.com/goodseats. There, using that special little URL, you will get a free month subscription to the service of Audible. You will get, importantly, a free audiobook download to choose from over 180,000 and growing number of titles. You got to be able to find something in there. You can cancel at any time. And as I said, once you've downloaded it, it is yours to keep in perpetuity. If you're a slow listener, no problem. Keep it. Keep listening to it. Listen to it over and over again if you want. Go right ahead. audibletrial.com/goodseats. Give them a try. And it's a no-risk proposition, so give it a try. If you don't like it, cancel it. But hell, keep that book and listen to it and enjoy it. And hopefully you'll find it as intriguing and fun as I do listening to audiobooks. We also want to thank our sponsors, oldschoolshirts.com. Oldschoolshirts.com, where you use the promo code GOODSEATS and get 10% off all of your purchases there, and you're going to get fine, high-quality, distressed look and feel T-shirts around teams and leagues no longer with us. Also, shopping malls and radio stations and all kinds of other pop culture things, amusement parks, things you may have forgotten about, but old school shirts, he says, .com has not forgotten and has commemorated in convenient T-shirt form. Oldschoolshirts.com. Check them out. You're going to find some very fun stuff, very affordable stuff, and make sure, of course, that you use the promo code GOODSEATS, and you will get 10% off of all of those purchases there at oldschoolshirts.com. And last, but certainly not least, our friends at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Sportshistorycollectibles.com is the place to go after you've gotten your shirt to get all the memorabilia that you want from those teams and leagues that you forgot or remember dearly and didn't think you'd ever see an item from again. And I'm certain that you will find a few items from some of the teams that Ron McDole played on, that being the St. Louis Football Cardinals of 1960 or 61 or so, the Houston Oilers in the early part of the AFL, and certainly the Buffalo Bills of the AFL. All of those teams you're going to find, I'm sure, at least one or two items at sportshistorycollectibles.com, and make sure you use the promo code GOODSEATS at checkout and get 15% off all of your purchases there. That's sportshistorycollectibles.com. As they say, visit there early and visit there often, and hell, make a purchase or two. Why don't you? Come on, give us some love, will you? We'd appreciate it, and it helps keep our lights on and all the good content that we've got planned for you to keep on coming. All right, so we're done with the promotional stuff. Thank you so much for listening to that. And now we thank you for listening to our fun conversation with the great dancing bear, Ron McDole. At what point were you kind of recognizing that either you had the talent and or could actually convey to people that you could play on the next level? I mean, when you were going into Nebraska for your first year, did you think that you had a shot at playing professional football? When did it kind of hit you that you might actually have a chance?
Well, I really didn't. I wanted to be a baseball player, so I went there on a football scholarship. Football scholarship, but they also said that they would, like the baseball deal. They said I could play baseball, and they'd let me play baseball, but it didn't turn out that way. Once you got into this, and then the scouting and all that stuff. They were always around. It just got more people involved, more coach. A lot of the coaches would be, even your own coaches would be working for a professional team. You know what I mean? Like on the side, they would recruit they would recruit the conferences. For example, like me, I was in what they called the Big Eight at that time, and there'd always be one or two guys in that league that really kind of worked for a pro team to make sure that they could wouldn't miss any good talents. And so they were around. Some of them were coaches, some of them were just assistant coaches, or some were just always around scouting the practice and stuff like that.
All right, so come the spring of 1961, you and I'm curious to sort of hear how common this was. You were drafted in the fourth round by both leagues, by the St. Louis Football Cardinals in the I think with the 50th pick in the fourth round, and also by the fledgling Denver Broncos of the brand spanking new AFL.
Yeah.
What do you remember? What do you remember about those draft days, and how did you kind of handle
them? Well, the draft days were, they were kind of hectic, because we had all the All-Star games to play in. You had like the East-West, and then there was a lot of different games that were highly scouted or actually put on by some of the professional teams, like the Blue-Gray game. There was even one in Buffalo in June. That was completely. I played in that thing, and that was in June in Buffalo, which was strictly all college seniors and stuff, and so that was all just like a pro game type of thing. And the North-South, I think, was a pro game also. So there were those type of games being played, just getting started and played more than they were before. Like when I entered school, there really wasn't that many of those type of games around yet, but then it developed more and more and became more and more. In time I was a senior, there was quite a few of those games that they would come and they would recruit you and you come and play in them, and they'd you pick up your expenses and things like that. Some of them were actually professional. If they paid you any money to play in them, then that happened to me, and one of them that made me professional, which screwed up my baseball career. I didn't realize I played in the game, but I wasn't told I would be professional, and so when the game and stuff was over with, then they informed me, or at least the baseball organization informed me that I wouldn't be able to play because I got paid for playing, so I was professional. So then that stopped the idea of playing baseball. It wasn't a lot of money or anything, you know what I mean? I made, I made $9,000. This is what my first contract was.
So 61. So who drafts you first? Is it the NFL or the AFL? How did that sort
AFL. Well, Canada talked to me first. Winnipeg, and I talked, and then they offered me like $14,000 or something, and I didn't feel like going to Canada. But and then the next one basically was Denver had drafted me, and so I went out and visited Denver and talked to their coaches and stuff. And then the last draft group that year was the NFL, and they were doing that mainly because they were afraid they'd get. They didn't want to draft somebody who already had been drafted. So that was one of the big things they always were concerned about. But they were mainly around the bowl games, All-Star games and stuff, and and so the NFL is the last team or league to draft. So then you had a choice with them, and they were really trying to get you to draft so that they could draft you. They didn't want to pick you and then find out that you'd already signed with somebody else.
So give us some sense as to the decision-making process between the Denver Broncos and the St. Louis Cardinals in your mind. Why the decision to go to the Cardinals in '61?
Well, it was basically about the same amount of money. And so I thought, well, if I was going to try to make it, I wanted to go, with an established, and they'd been established, and there was, I thought that if I was going to try and play, I'd try to play in what I consider the bigger league or the better league type of thing. And so they were very picky about trying to sign you. They wouldn't even think of trying to sign you unless they, got the whole thing. But money-wise, they didn't give you, they gave you the same amount of money. In other words, I got $9,000 from them, and so it wasn't a big decision. No one really got a lot of money. I think of the guys of the time, as far as position that I played, which is a lineman or defensive line, and I played offensive line also. But most of the guys were in the same range of the amount of money they made.
So the perceived stability of the NFL versus that of the unproven AFL was kind of the tiebreaker for you, huh?
Well, the AFL, being a new league, they had a lot of quarterbacks. They were getting a lot of quarterbacks and stuff, and throwing the ball all the time. So it made the game more of an air game instead of a running game. And so, if you were a receiver or defensive back or somebody that you would kind of adjust to where you thought you'd have a better chance of playing. And so that was the main thing that I ever noticed. And then as far as playing on the line or on defense, those were kind of a selected situation, because at that time, I mean, you played both ways. You didn't play one way. They didn't just draft a defensive end or anything like that. If you were in college, you were playing offense and defense, and then they changed it afterwards. So they gave you a better chance if you could play in both places.
Yeah, my sense is when you were in St. Louis, right? This is, I guess, right, maybe the second year that the Cardinals were in St. Louis, actually, because they had been in the second fiddle team in Chicago for many years prior.
Right.
But any recollections? It seems like it was kind of a tough sell in those early years in St. Louis. The read of, and I think you allude to some of this in your writing about in your book about the challenge of finding practice facilities, and that doesn't seem like the crowds were really there either.
Yeah,
right?
both places it was terrible. I mean, no matter where you're at, and St. Louis had the same problem because they really didn't have any football facilities. They had a great baseball team there, and we kind of shared some of that stuff, but we didn't have any practice facilities. We'd just get on a bus and drive around town until we found a park or place that we could work out, and then we worked out down there. We worked at a stable one week, and we worked on a couple big parks, and but in Buffalo, for example, we had the same problem when I played in Buffalo. Hell, we didn't know where we were going to practice, and we didn't really have any stadium. We had a little baseball stadium, which was a hard time to play in that, and so it wasn't the easiest situation. Then you had all the other things. So, and there was a constant thing about trying to steal players from each other, but that involved moving around a lot of money, and so they just didn't want to spend any money. In the beginning of the stuff, there was some money spent, I guess, but I mean, compared to money today is like night and day. I mean, most of us, I mean, I did. I was a school teacher, actually, but I was also a shop teacher, and I worked on houses and built stuff like that to make money, and worked on all kinds of things like that when I was playing. I taught school a couple times because it was good for me. I was a shop teacher, and I could do that along with other things. And that's how we made. And if you're married, you had to work because you couldn't make enough money to support a family. So most of the guys all worked, and their wives almost all worked. My wife worked also. So that type of thing created a problem and so on. But you just tried to do the best you could do because they just didn't pay much money.
Well, so how much of that sort of dual career, I guess, would you say that you had to endure, right? So certainly, I guess, through the early part of your career in the 60s, right? But how long did it take to kind of, shall we say, be self-sufficient just as a pro football player, or did that sort of, supplemental income thing last through the rest of your career through the 70s as well?
Well, it was the biggest problem of it, created a problem. I mean, the conditioning and everything and all the stuff you were involved in, basically you had to make sure you did it yourself. You didn't have any fancy stuff like they do now, certain weights and stuff, but most of it was just working out and getting into a position where you could report in shape and perform to the point that you could keep your job, type of thing. But there was always somebody coming along trying to take your job, and you just had to keep struggling and fighting it. And if you got tired of it, then you just walked away from it and said, "The hell with it." So, with the hope that someday you would really make some money, and of course that came true today. The amount of money they make is just unbelievable. The most money I ever made was when I was with Redskins. That was George Allen. He paid me, I guess, about most. But he was an incentive man. He gave you a lot of incentives. So I'd get so much for interceptions, and or I get so much for tackles and this, and then, but you still had a base salary, but that was the best. Only that's the way you could make money, a little better money, and get more money. But I think I made about $70,000 one year, but most of it was bonus money, incentive money from doing like intercepting passes. I mean, I hold a record in the league now for a lineman, defensive lineman. I have 13 interceptions, and I would get paid. They would be paying me about $5,000 an interception, something like that. So that's how I make my money.
Well, there you go. Well, all right. So give me a sense then of how you go from St. Louis to actually going to the AFL and the Houston Oilers. Give our audience a sense of how that change comes about. Was that something that you were in charge of, or was that through?
Well, no, I'm like a freak. What it amounts to is I really never got hurt or anything like that. However, I did have when I was with the Cardinals. When I started with the Cardinals, I was in the first year, and I was playing. We had a lot of injuries, and so I was playing every position on the line, offense, defensive line, and so what happened was that Eventually, I stayed on the team, and because I just needed ball players, and I was able to keep my job. But then the following years, the one thing about St. Louis was our coach was from Canada. It was Pop Ivy, and Pop Ivy was from Canada, so we played Canada a game or two in practice. So we had a little different situation, and then in the off season, the first season, they switched jobs. The Houston coach in the AFL, Wally Limo, I guess it was, went to St. Louis, and Pop Ivy went to Houston. So that changed my whole thing. He liked me, and so he eventually took me and brought me, traded Denver to get me from them to go down and play in Houston. And then what happened in Houston was after about the fifth game, I got hit in the head and went into migraine seizures. I didn't even know what the hell migraine procedures were. But anyway, and then that they just, from then on, I was blackballed. But fortunately for me, that there was a couple of owners around that still, Buffalo, Ralph Wilson. I mean, it wasn't for me. It wasn't for him. I'd never played another game.
All right, so let's back up for a second. There's a couple of things.
Give me a job.
Yeah, there are a couple of things I want to get to that we want to unpack here. So Pop Ivy, he going from the Cardinals to the Houston Oilers. Well, that wasn't a trade, right? He just had a better offer. Is that how he got there?
I believe that's the way it was.
Okay, and then he
came down. He quit. I guess the story was he quit. It could have been an argument or anything with his organization. So he just went down and took the job at Houston. And so when it came around the next year, he kept in contact with me and said that he wanted me. He thought I was a good ball player and so on. So he eventually did get me when the Cardinals released me. He didn't. They picked me up. They didn't pick me up. They made a trade. So I mean, it wasn't a release situation. And I tried. Houston, no one would touch it because then one of the teams came in. The Vikings, they came in with that year, and so they signed me the next year. And so when I get there, that was like night and day. Van Broecklyn was the coach, and God, no one liked him, and it was terrible. And I actually went back to teaching school. And then when the Buffalo called me, they said, we played against you. We think you got a lot of talent and all this, and if we can get you, we can probably win the AFL. And I said, if I was a quarterback, I'd believe you, but another defensive end or an offensive lineman, I don't think are going to win any what's-it-called. And we almost did. We won the next two AFL championships.
All right, well, before we get to Buffalo, I want to close out here on Houston, right? Because in '62, you were on quite the team. I mean, you went all the way to the AFL championship game. And by the way, for background, right, this is a team, the Houston Oilers, that had actually won the first two AFL championships and was going for a third, right? So you're kind of
right. I was on that team, on the third team.
Right, and you're stepping into a situation where you got a pretty good, solid team going on there. Obviously, you got Pop Ivy now stepping in. And that game, how much do you remember about that championship game? Because according to my records, it was a pretty darn long game. I think is actually
it was
the championship game ever.
Weird game. There was some crazy calls made by the players. I mean, I was just a bench rider when I was playing there, and there was quite a lot of crazy things. They made a couple of bad decisions, players who should have known better, and made some bad calls on penalties. But that was a good team. I mean, I had Blanda and George, and I became good friends with George, and guys like that. So there was a lot of good ball players on that Houston team.
All right. So how does Buffalo happen? How does your situation in Houston unfold, and how does the actual transfer or move to Buffalo? When they called me up at home, and I already had another job teaching school, that wasn't a problem. And I thought I said, well, I think I'm going to give it up. And then Lou calls me back, and Saban, and says, tries to keep drawing me into it. So I said, well, I'm in shape and everything. That's what I said. All right, I'll come up and give it a shot. So I got on a train and went from Toledo, Ohio to Buffalo, and their training facility was a hotel, and they'd build a building behind the hotel to put a field and stuff like that. And so I thought, well, what am I getting into? And then I thought, whatever. And so they were down playing an exhibition game down in North Carolina. And so then they put me, my roommate was Jack Kemp. He was playing at that time. But they put me in his room. He was only place they had a spare. And then when they get back that night, then the next day, Lou, I went in his office and everything else, and he talked to me about it and discussed it and wanted to know, how much money and this type of thing. And so he said, well, we really think we went over your films and everything. We really think you'll fit in for us. And I said, well, he said, well, we're going to go to the coast. And of course, when they went on the road, they always took at least one player with them, because in case they had an injury, then they would have somebody to replace them. Because in the AFL, you traveled all the time like you're a basketball team. How you'd be on the road for 4 or 5 weeks sometimes. And anyway, I said, well, that's great. So they sent my contract in, and the league turned it down. And so he calls me up and says, why don't you come in here? We got to talk about something. So I went in and talked to him about it, and he said, he says, you passed all our medical people, all our officials, everything else, and they couldn't find anything wrong with you. And this is what you got, and this is what's happening. And do you, he said, well, we sure want you to play. And so he says, but I can't I have to call Ralph Wilson. So he gets on the phone and calls Detroit. And he says, tells him the story, what's going on. And he says, I checked this out a little bit, Coach. And he said, they're just trying to keep a player out of the league. And he said, we played against this kid, and he can really help us. He can play in several different positions and so on. And so he said, well, what's the problem? And he said, well, they're worried about him getting his head damaged or something. And we'd get stuck with a big bill or a big medical thing and all that kind of stuff. And so he says, do we need him? He said, we need everybody. And this Ralph said, sign him. He says, I own two hospitals. I'm not worried about the kid's head. So anyway, that's how I ended up in Buffalo. All right, gang, we take a quick pause here to remind you that our friends at MyBookie are here to help you as you get into the nitty-gritty of the pro and college football season. Hell, it doesn't really matter what sport, because MyBookie has got you covered just about anywhere. But certainly the football season, it's probably the most intense time of year to get those wagers in. And I can't recommend enough MyBookie at mybookie.ag is the place to go to do so. And of course, because it is football season, it is getting intense at MyBookie. They are slammed with new bettors, and they want to give everybody a chance to not only sign up, but also get the best possible customer service involved. So you may have heard some of our earlier ads talking about using that promo code SEATS to get that dollar for dollar match all the way up to $1,000 on your initial deposit. And that's a good deal in and of itself now, isn't it? However, if you can wait until after 7 o'clock Eastern time here in the United States to set up your account with MyBookie, that's mybookie.ag, and tweak your promo code to SEATS25, you will get an additional $25 if your deposit is $100 or more. So in essence, you're getting a dollar for dollar match all the way up to $1,000. And if you're setting up your account after 7 o'clock Eastern time in the evening, you're getting an extra $25 to your initial deposit on them, assuming your deposit's $100 or more. And that's if you use the promo code SEATS25, again, after 7 o'clock in the evening. And, that's a great incentive right there. That's basically a couple of free wagers, depending on how much you're going to bet. This is how confident you are, and great incentive to try and to hopefully benefit from the services of MyBookie. That's mybookie.ag. Make sure you use that promo code SEATS25 after 7 p.m. and get that extra $25 bonus. In addition to, and if you do it before 7 o'clock, okay, just regular old seats will get you that dollar for dollar match, a good deal in and of itself, for up to $1,000 on your initial deposit. MyBookie, that's mybookie.ag. Thank you for your consideration, friends. And now back to our conversation. And you played for Coach Lou Saban, right, there. And clearly the team was, you couldn't have picked probably a better team, right? Because 64-65, you guys win the AFL championship, and even in the final in 66 that you got to. So give us a sense of what Buffalo was like by comparison to your other two AFL stops. And when did you kind of know you were on to something good up in Buffalo?
Yeah, that was a very good experience, and it was good. I mean, the example, Saban was an excellent coach. Ralph Wilson turned out to be a great owner, and everything seemed fine. There was jobs there. We had some kids out of Canada, like Cookie Gilchrist and Warlick, and some people like it. Anyway, we had a heck of a team. The team was kind of a unique team because you had players that were playing, and they were pretty good, but they could play almost anywhere. In other words, if you got somebody hurt, somebody would always step in, another receiver or a defensive back. There's always another player that would step in and perform like the other guy did. So the performance from the players were fantastic, and no matter which position. And so that's really what mainly our success was. But also that Lou Saban was a type of coach that he'd move you around. That's what he did with me. We had another, Tom Day was a defensive end who was there and came from Philadelphia or somewhere. And I was there, and of course, I came up right at the beginning of the year. And so they made me the extra guy, and I traveled with the first couple games. But then basically it was like I really had a heck of an opportunity. And so I struggled through that year with everybody else. I did manage to get on the starting team. But then the following The following year, I go back home because I got to do some extra stuff with my degree, and so I get a phone call from them. Of course, now things are changing a little bit in the leagues. I get a phone call from them, and they said they want me in. Get on the plane and get in Buffalo by tomorrow. And normally, he said, I want to talk to you about your contract. Normally, they didn't want to talk to you about your contract. So anyway, I flew back and they doubled everybody's contract and tripled some of them. That's when, we had Gugelak, the kicker we got out of Europe.
Yeah, Pete Gugelak.
Yeah, Pete Gugelak, right. So Pete, they signed him, I think it was Chicago, Detroit, no, the Giants, I think, signed him away from us. And that caused the breakup. In other words, the AFL said, bullshit, this is not going to happen. We're not going to lose all the stuff we've been doing. And, of course, Al Davis was head of the show then, and so he immediately, they called everybody in to their home, all the players that they thought the NFL wanted. They brought us in and automatically doubled and tripled your contracts. So I went to $30-some thousand, and I said, this is better. And so that's kind of how because what happened, Al Davis then, or I guess it was him. Anyway, the AFL then went around and started signing up a lot of the NFL players, quarterbacks, fullbacks, their stars, and giving them a big contract. Some of them getting not just $200,000 or $300,000. That was a lot of money back in, what was that, 1960 something.
So it was more of a war for talent, more of a talent raid kind of going on then, right?
Right, that's exactly right. So they just and players, the AFL started signing up big time NFL players, giving them a 3-year contract, for example. That's a lot of money for what they were making. And then what they were doing, that $30,000 was a lot of money for me. I wasn't getting any money. But
the idea though of playing in Buffalo and win, it was such a dominant team. I mean, 1964, you guys beat the Chargers going away in the championship game, and then you beat them in '65 at their place. Was it 23-0? I think. I mean, Lou Saban was coach of the year twice. I mean, you guys were a dominant team. It had to be something extra special besides the salaries going up a bit, right?
Well, the big thing is that they were just they didn't anticipate the AFL doing that. They didn't think they had any money. That would be my guess. So they started. The NFL had a lot of money. I mean, Christ, they still got a lot of money. They're still doing it now. They're doing the same thing now, except it's in the millions. So they don't. That's what they're doing, just increasing the pay type of stuff, and but they're getting so far that's fine. They're changing the whole game right now. See, I mean, in playing, it's not the same game that I played when I was. It's now they're in the situation where the fouls are a lot different. The whole theory is their thought is that they're not going to be. Their thought is that there won't be as many entries. They're going to have twice as many entries because they're letting guys push, pull, hit late, all kinds of stuff, and it's going to do a lot of damage. And they'll let and then they've got the game is now that you can take the ball, one guy can run with it, and he can jump, pick up on him. Have you watched the game lately?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was going to sort of wait till sort of the end of our chat about this conversation, but now's a good time, I guess, right? I mean, you wonder, right? Are we near kind of, peak NFL, I guess, in terms of how much money there is in the game, the injuries, frankly, maybe this is a better question for you since you played for almost 20 years, right? I mean, a pretty long and substantial career across both leagues. What about injuries and in particular?
I was very fortunate. I never really had anything other than that migraine problem, which was really nothing but the standpoint of it. But now I'll tell you exactly what's bad. You know that great little team we were talking about in Buffalo?
Yeah.
We had one time we had a run of 17 games without letting a touchdown be scored on the ground. And that line was Tom Sestak, Jim Dunaway, me, Tom Day, and we didn't give up anything. And that's the kind of play we had. That was just the four of us. But you know what the bad thing is? I'm the only one still alive. The other guys are dead. That's shocking, isn't it?
Well, do you think that's because of injuries and or the toll that the game played on there?
It's all everybody's got. You don't even know, the people don't even know about it. You got Jim Dunaway just died a month ago. I've had Alzheimer's now for 2 years, and Pat Fisher, who's the closest friend I've got. He's been sick, 10 years. And then they set up this program and they say they're going to give us all these tests and check and everything else. And so we go through all that bullshit. And what they do, the first thing they do is they don't even examine you, and you got to go and it's a big pain in the neck to go through, but that's basically what it is. So now they got it set up so I'm sure, I don't know what those contracts look like, but I'm sure they got protection for themselves. But the bad thing is that you can't even call anybody because you don't know if they're going to be alive. It's really we're over quite a few people. And the other is some of them are actually committing suicide. Some of the players are because they don't want to get caught without making any money, and they keep waiting to get funded, and they haven't funded anybody, not one person that I know of. So that kind of stuff has got everybody else just saying, well, hell, you can play or not play. But they're trying to change it to make it work, so I hope they do it, but you couldn't get me back in the game.
So, okay,
no matter how much
so I mean, this is obviously one of the major problems that I think begrudgingly the league has started to recognize, right? So going back to that, so the idea of concussions and blows to the head and sort of the repetitive nature of the sport and the physicality of the sport, right? And obviously we're talking about a time, the 60s, the 70s, where it's probably a bit more macho and more, like shake it off. And you have your quote unquote, your bell rung, right? I mean, these are, today, at least the awareness is much greater. But at what point, I mean, you say you were lucky and certainly so. At what point do you and others start to recognize, perhaps after your careers are ending or maybe even during your playing career, that perhaps something is sort of not right physically and or mentally with folks?
I would think that we talked about it all the time. We were very aware of what was going on, but the thing about it is that the money wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that good. But the thing is that most players were playing because they really liked playing the sport. I mean, I like playing it. I fortunately I didn't have troubles all the time, but it's really terrible. I mean, they let the thing go too far. Is what the big problem was. They really did. They let it go too far. They let it keep going and going and thinking that it was going to change, and it hasn't changed. There's a lot of guys that have suffered on the thing, but my problem with it is that I've got a lot of close friends I played with, because I played 20 years, so I played with a lot of people, but even those people are not making it either. They're gradually dying, and there's no one. You don't know who it is unless it's somebody big. You get it in the paper, but there's so many people who are just the players on the team. They're not the star. They're the ones that are missing, and so what some of them do. Well, I know of 3 that committed suicide. So they're trying to find some way to get money because they're not going to get any money from the National Football League. So the big thing is that it's become just a pain in the neck. And now they're playing a game that I think it's better, but it'll be interesting to see how the fans accept it.
Well, let's. I don't want to completely in a sad, unfortunate direction, but this is important. I mean, it's really important stuff. I mean, we've spent a lot of time, on this show talking about the leagues and teams and whatnot, and these are part of it, right? They're not just all sort of necessarily happy memories or interesting little anecdotes, right? So, but I do want to. So, I was born probably just near the tail end of the AFL, but maybe. I'd love to hear in your voice sort of what the AFL was like, certainly versus relative to the NFL, right? Because when you look at the history of it, you look at the films of it, it certainly seemed like the AFL was a hell of a lot more fun and more vivid and more action-oriented and just more dynamic than the NFL was at that time. Is that a fair statement?
Well, one of the big things about it, and when they came together, and I spent 9 years in one and 9 years in the other one, so I have a perfect example of what it is. The funny things about it, not funny things, but the thing about it, what was good about the AFL, basically, we had some different. We threw a lot of balls. We had a lot of pass receivers. A lot of good quarterbacks, and they tried. We would throw, had a good air game type of thing. Basically, the other league was doing a lot of running the ball on the ground, and they liked doing that. And especially some of the teams like Green Bay and Chicago and things like that who did that type of thing. And but then people started liking and television came and made it a little more to a point where they could watch it and predict it and that type of thing. So they kind of liked the faster game, the more exciting. When you had people like Lance Walworth and people running around catching passes and that type of thing, and it became a closer game, and. Like George Allen, for example, was probably one of the best defensive people in the world, and he had a lot of great things going on. The plan for him was like night and day, and so they were going on. But gradually, it gets to the point where they, you got a product, you're trying to make it better, make it work out or whatnot. So they start trying to do things. Now they've changed it completely different because they're stuck with a point where they won't be able to keep playing it the way they were playing it. And if they can't, and so they're going to. I was trying to watch a game the other day, and all of a sudden they switched to another channel, and they were passing the ball from one guy to the other guy, and I didn't know what the heck they were doing. And so anyway, the only thing bad about that is that you get all that contact with each other in a short space right during the line, and you're getting a lot of action that does a lot of damage. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't know if I didn't have any really bad problems, so I should say I would play anyway. But I don't know. I don't. None of my kids are playing. They played high school, but that was it. And so.
But
aside
from winning, though, having a really a good series of teams there in the mid '60s with the Bills, and obviously those things couldn't and didn't last forever, right? As the team sort of declined on the field, right? But maybe give you a sense of sort of what you as a player and maybe your other players were thinking about. How much did you kind of recognize that the AFL would ultimately, in some way, shape, or form, merge or figure out some kind of combination with the NFL, right? It seemed like it was kind of a steady move towards that. I mean, or were you just sort of happy to be playing, enjoying yourself, obviously getting the paycheck and the proverbial love of the game? Did you care about this sort of how the drama was playing out between? We everybody thought it would merge eventually. That's what everybody thought. I mean, you come to work every day like anything else, but everybody thought but there's some things that happened as you went along and everything else, and the money was and you knew the money was going to be better because it was just a common deal because they had the people that had the money, they had the people who wanted to put, invest the money in it, and you had players that were willing to play in it and everything else. So it seemed like there was no way it could fail. And in reality, it has failed because of the injury and stuff. And that was seen way ahead of time. It was the fight, like boxers, and everybody's involved in that type of a physical deal. It's something's going to go wrong somewhere. Now there's so many things that medically and everything else you have to wrestle with as tough. But you always keep thinking that, well, that's not going to last forever. But it does. It seemed like it would last forever. But there is a lot of damage done in the game. But now, I don't know. What they've done now, they didn't do anything to take that stuff out of the game. They still are trying to. So you can't run somebody at full speed and have them hit you in the back of the legs or hit you on the side of the knee without losing everything. And those things are just terrible. So what I looked at, I don't think they've done any big deal on that. They don't even have the penalties. They try, the penalty situation, they tried that. That didn't work. And it never will because the problem with it is that they don't enforce it. And people don't realize if you get thrown out of the game, that's pretty expensive for a player, and very expensive. And so they've been fining people in the millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars, but at the same time they're not doing anything. They're not changing anything. They're just giving them more money. So that's their idea to make them better. All right, a couple more questions on Buffalo, and then we'll sort of let you go up with the rest of your evening because I don't want to keep you all night here.
That's all right.
But you have a chapter in the book which is interesting. So before we leave Buffalo, what is it with these Halloween parties there? Apparently some kind of famous What was that all about? These famous Buffalo Bills Halloween parties?
Well, it's like the Buffalo group was like it was a great bunch of guys, and you get guys like that when you're involved in sports or anything of that, where you got a bunch of people trying to do things to be successful and everything else. And I bought of course, being a shop teacher, basically, I bought an old brewery in Buffalo, out in Eden, New York, and made it into a home. And it, we did it all ourselves, and everything else. And so we used it also for the Halloween parties. I mean, we lived there, and we did all the remodeling on it and stuff. And so we'd had Halloween parties before that, just regular Halloween parties. But we were out there, and and that one had a widow's watch in it, and we'd put balloons in there with ghost sheets and stuff. Anyway, we thought we should have a party after they had to be on days that we weren't playing, but we had to we did work around a lot of dates, but and everybody would come, and the big thing about it was it was great, everybody loved it, and so we got along with it, Paul McGuire, myself, and all of us, and Jack Kemp, and we'd have these every year at Halloween, and we had to jockey the time around and the date, but that was about the only thing, and it's just one of those things that took off, and it kept us together. You know what I mean? It's a thing that keeps you together, and everybody enjoyed it and liked it, and the black players got along with. We never had any trouble with any of that stuff. It was all we had Cookie Gilchrist and we had some great guys, and so we never had any trouble with race or any of that type of thing in Buffalo during that period of time.
Well, it seems like camaraderie, right? Was well,
that's what I'm trying to say.
Right? Yeah.
We had when you think about it. For example, like people for example, one of the things that the AFL did create was success and that type of thing. And the main reason I think it was is because my roommate was Jim Dunaway, and Jim was a big old Southern boy with a bunch of cattle, or he was, and we were roommates for years. And then George Flynn. So we didn't have any trouble with if we had to stay with a black ball player. We didn't have trouble with that. Anything like that. That was not a problem for us. And so I think those parties and those players were that type. It made you like you're a little different than everybody else. You didn't have a gripe or a bitch or a moan or anything else, and you got along with it. And the other thing, plus, we had a roommate. You see what I mean? We traveled on the road so damn much, you always had a roommate. So you had to, nothing else, you had to take care of your roommate. Keep him out of the bars, keep him out of trouble. And so that was another big project for everybody. So that kind of a team and that type of personnel and the players that way was one of the biggest successes of that Buffalo team. Of course, the coaches were the type of guys that would, make it work. And so that was things that we did that made it, fun.
All right,
it was fun.
Give me a sense of those last Buffalo Bills years for you, because the team clearly, fell way down from the mid '60s when you guys were tearing up the league. Well, it's like everything else. Time catches up with you. We never had any trouble with drugs with anybody. I mean, not in the Buffalo team and everything. Any team I really played with, we never had that problem. But
we started getting problems from. It's like anything else. When you got people joining things, the team, and they're coming really awesome. You know, we had a lot of people coming out of the West Coast, and they were getting busy as hell with drugs and things like that. And we'd have, see, we're right there in Buffalo. You know who's in Buffalo? Half of the mafia. God, you can't go into the bars, and we had all these cops following us around. They weren't cops; they were special detectives working for the league. And most people never realize that stuff all exists. Because I build houses. I own a building business in Buffalo. Me and Alan B. Miller, we were building houses left and right, and all of a sudden we had to have this big meeting. And we go to this big meeting, and God, half of the people we build houses for at that meeting. So we were told to get out of the building business. And so there was a lot of some things like that happens eventually, I guess. But it never really got out of control. So I think that had a lot of, and I think that the thing like the party had a lot to do with keeping it like a party. People would come and they didn't bring anything that would be illegal or cause a problems for me. I mean, I owned the property and everything. It's a big old 100-and-some-year-old home. 18 years. It was a Swanquart brewery. So that type of stuff, we didn't have any of that.
Well, I guess you needed those distractions, right? I mean, 1968, your team went 1-12-1. I mean, I can imagine how frustrating it must have been on the field. Let me ask you one other question though about Buffalo before we sort of wrap this up. 69 and 70, right? That was sort of the last year of the AFL and the first year of the fully joining into the NFL. But interesting footnote there, right, was the arrival of one sort of dynamic running back, number 32, the Juice, O.J. Simpson. Crossed a little bit with him, right, in your latter years with the Bills. What were your impression of him then coming into the team? Obviously, he was quite the dynamic presence coming into Buffalo at that time, no?
Yeah, no one knew what it was going to be like. Come in and then he had, when he came out and joined the ball club, he had the same problems a lot of the young guys that when they're coming in to play run into. They get into a point where they're used to playing in the college rank and everything else, and they got blockers all the time for them. And good blockers type of thing, and a lot of help in a sense. And they do. Some of them do very well, and some don't do the damn. You try to, and you teach them what you can teach them. Like when they're running, he was a running back, and he come. Of course, I was a defensive lineman, and he come up the line of scrimmage and dance sometime. He didn't know which way to go. But you see, he doesn't have that problem when he was in college, because there's a big lineman up there not blocking somebody, knocking him out of the oil so he can get by or make a break. So you got to tell him, look, you got to make. I always tell him, I said, look, you got to make me think you're going to run this way or do this, because I'm not going to do anything until I know what you're going to do. And so that takes a little time to get him used to that type of thing. And he had that trouble. Then he got hurt, and he went home. You know what I mean? The team was a real close team, and we've been in, championships and everything else. And all of a sudden, you come in the morning and come in and go to get dressed. And of course, Al Collins was a guy they had to draft also, and they brought him in to take my job. So, but that didn't bother me. But the thing is, it's just like, hey, this is everybody's involved in this. And anyway, he just went home and spent a couple weeks, then came back. He didn't have anybody's permission. and they let him do it. I mean, and so things like that. And then that kind of started, those things started creating problems because other guys would get unhappy about it. And I was only there for his 1 year. I mean, I was traded off to George Allen, and so that's about basically. Other than that, he socially he was fine. He really ran around. We didn't have a lot of black ball players, so we had like 2 or 3. But he ran around with mostly anybody different. So other than him and Al always stuck together, and that was pretty well it. There was no sign of any. His wife, his family, everybody was great people. So that we didn't really have a big amount of trouble with him, although trying to get him adjusted into something and realize that everybody's got to do something to make it work.
All right, before one last question about Buffalo. Give me a sense of during the AFL days. What was it like playing there? Obviously, it's probably, I would argue, probably one of the more harsh weather climates for home games. And what was the city of Buffalo like in terms of embracing the Bills team, one of the smallest markets, right?
I don't think it ever changed. What's great about it, the people are fantastic. I mean, that was like when we were coming out of college, everybody was trying to avoid Buffalo. I mean, that's really. I mean, we'd go to these all-star games and go play, and we played in one. Buffalo had one in June, but we'd go we'd be playing these down in somewhere Florida somewhere, and everybody said, God, I hope I don't get traded. I mean, I don't get drafted by Buffalo. They didn't want to go to Buffalo. But it turned out to be probably the best place to go. It did for me anyway. And so other than that, the people are just unbelievable fans. I mean, I can go on Monday morning or something after the game on Sunday. Go down I lived out in the country basically, not too far from the brewery. I lived right there with the brewery, and I'd go in the grocery store, and the little old lady on the cashier jumped all over me. Oh, Ron, I can't believe you let that guy free. And they know the game, but just about as good as you do. You know what I mean? So they're big fans, and they really watch the game, and they'll tell you if you're not getting it done. They're not afraid to tell you. So that's Buffalo.
Yeah, it's a big small town in that regard, right? And maybe that's some of the charm, not unlike, say, a Green Bay, right, where it's I want to say the only game in town, but it's something that's special and unique versus sort of being one of a number of different professional teams, or just other kinds of distractions, like say in New York City, which is just full of them. Right. All right, last question then. So take us through the segue into Washington, and arguably what might have been perceived, or you thought it might have been sort of the beginning of the end of your career, actually was kind of a rejuvenation, right, with George Allen and the Over the Hill gang in Washington, right? Because you spent a good part of the 70s on a very stable and very interesting Washington Redskins team.
Yeah, it was another great. I was very fortunate. These two teams were a lot alike, different thing else is that George Allen was first thing that happened basically. Ralph Wilson again did me a favor. He got when he hired who the hell did he? I can't remember the coach anymore. Anyway,
was it Lou Saban again when he came back?
No, he hired
Harvey Johnson maybe before him.
The guy from Oakland, John Roush.
John Roush, yeah. So John Roush was the coach.
John Roush,
69, 70.
and then did what a lot of coaches do: got rid of everybody and moved everybody around, changed the whole defense, changed the whole offense. So that became, like we defensively we ran different defenses and all kinds of stuff. We had guys that would pursue across the field and some that didn't, but you just had to know. Anyway, So John, so what happened is George Allen bugged Ralph Wilson to death, and we call him in the morning at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatnot, and so what really happened was that it got to the point where the team we played 1 year and just fell apart, completely fell apart, and Ralph Wilson came to me and he said, we are losing players left and right, and he said, you're one of my older players, and he said, and I hate to see you, you're not going to stay alive here long enough. And I said, he said, George Allen's driving me crazy, calls me at 3 o'clock in the morning, won't know if he'll trade me to him, and this and that and all that kind of stuff. And so he said, I told him yesterday that I'll trade him, and I'll trade you. So he traded me, which was the best thing that he could have done for me. And because I made more money, and I got out of that rat's nest. So, and of course, the Bills went just crashing. They just crashed. And I got to go to where I was one of the younger guys. I was 36. So, hell, it was like Hollywood. We had players that knew everything. It was like playing with a bunch of coaches. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's great. It's a renewed and talk about camaraderie again. You've got a lot of a commonality, right, with players,
right.
And doing it for a coach who's who obviously was in the process of becoming legendary at the time. Yeah. So, all right, one last question. I and this is maybe a semi-personal one, but it also speaks to the title of your book and how you got your nickname. I actually went to college at Georgetown and certainly partook, if you will, of certain establishments, shall we say, in the Georgetown section of D.C., bars and restaurants and whatnot. But maybe you could set the table, tell the story of how you got what your nickname is or became, how you got it, and where. What I think was in the Georgetown section of D.C., no?
Well, it was down in Georgetown where I was at. Anyway, we hung out, most of us, of course we were all, we're not 25, we're, 20 to 39 and shit like that. But anyway, there were several places we hung out all the time. In town, but we all kind of ran around together like that. We were all the same age, basically, and our families, or our kids were grown up, in a sense, and our wives are, a lot of the wives are similar, same age type of thing, and so we got the togetherness was always there. And George, he pushed all that type of stuff, type of things to keeping us together, and everybody else, and he knew the game so well, and we were all like coaches. We had Jack Pardee was our main general, and Jack, of course, he had cancer at that time, and he died shortly after that, after his last job. But anyway, he was the head man, and boy, George and them, they'd spend hours together, and the rest of us, we all would hang together and help each other, and we knew a lot, and we knew how to do a lot of things, and so George knew how to do a lot of things too, and it really made us successful. We just didn't able to do everything, but we did do a lot of good things and made a lot of good plays through the period of time. And we really thought we could win the Super Bowl, but unfortunately, it's like everything else. You got to get out there and try to get it done. And if you get a few injuries or a few things go the wrong way on you, you might not be able to do it. So, but he could get you ready. There was no doubt about that. he would have you ready, and he would call plays, and he really called almost all the defense that we ran, and he just loved defense. I mean, his theory was that you got to win on defense and keep people from scoring, and but he was disciplined. He wouldn't let you get away with anything, and you got fined if you didn't, if you did something wrong, which you weren't supposed to do, type of thing. And I was very fortunate. I mean, I played those 20, whatever it was, 20 years, and I got two of the best coaches in the world. I got Saban and George Allen, and you couldn't do any better than that. They knew the game, they knew how it was played, and they knew how to discipline you, and they knew how to do all that stuff. Because when you jumped off sides or something like that, that was like the end of the world. What the hell are you doing? I mean, he didn't swear or anything. He said, "What are you doing? We're trying to win a ball game, and you can't be playing when you want to play." And boy, he just disliked that type of thing. We're in this trying to make money and win this thing, and we can't do it if we don't get players to do it. So that's what George is like.
All right, so I want to get to tell me about that Super Bowl then. You lost to the undefeated Miami Dolphins in 72.
Right.
And pretty close game, though, right? You came pretty darn close.
Yeah, there's a lot of things about that game. I helped write a book, and there's a lot of things there's some things I'd love to have been able to do that, but I couldn't do. We used to work on things that to play against when you play against them. In other words, our special team coach was Marv Levy. He was one of the best coaches in the league.
Certainly.
And Marv, I worked with Marv all the time because I had all these clauses in there for blocking kicks and all this stuff, and so Marv, he had studied the film, and then I'd studied after he did, and we'd work on how to block field goals, how to block punts, how to block all those things that George loved and wanted. And so we'd had all kinds of things, and then he'd give me this. I mean, I'd go over it, and then we'd find a weakness in a line for like a field goal team, and it's easy because a lot of players, it's not they don't pay that much attention, especially younger kids, and they come into the league and they start thinking it's just this and that. The hell, it's tough. You can't. There's a lot of things you can do to create block kicks and stuff like that. And so I had a lot of those things, and we worked out one that we thought for sure was going to block the first field goal, but unfortunately it didn't happen. I'd tell you what it is, but it's one of my best friends I've played with for years. Originally he played for Oakland, but it didn't work. But we came close.
Well, still, it's a Super Bowl, and you have a couple of AFL championship rings under your belt, so to speak. And all right, well, here's my one last question. You were playing for the Redskins during the 70s under George Allen. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't know this, but or have some experience with it. But is it true, from what you know, did Richard Nixon, then president of the United States, did he actually call in plays to Allen once in a while? Did you ever hear of that story, and or if it's maybe real or not?
No, I know what you're talking about. In fact, I just hung up Richard Nixon's pictures before I left today. He used to come out to practice once in a while, and George would, like him, he'd come out, and then usually, it was always a big game or something, and he'd go out and he'd come out, and he was very polite and nice, he'd talk to guys and come over talking and have some pictures taken, something like that. And then he'd always try to give us a play. I don't think any of them ever worked, but whatever it was, George would let him give us a play, and if he could, he would do it. But if he didn't use anything, George called all the plays. So no matter what he would tell him, he wasn't going to give him a play or let him give us a play that would affect us. And so that was done usually. I probably say that was done 3 or 4 times over the period of when he was there. But,
just another interesting story and a very interesting life and career, Ron. And I appreciate your. Well, we used to get a kick out of it because and he was a lot of fun. You know, he knew enough about the sport to be dangerous.
That, he'd come. I think he used to practice learning the name of the play because he'd always come up with some play name. We said, "Oh, where'd that come from?" And so it was fun, but.
Well, I think he played college Division III football at I guess it was Occidental. He went to back.
Yeah, I think he did too. I'm not sure because he'd talk to you, about it, and of course we had to practice, but we'd take about 10 or 15 minutes, and then get off to what we had to do, but. It was fun. It was a good thing, and wasn't a bad thing. So we all joined it, and if we lost it, it'd be our fault.
All right, our thanks to defensive legend Ron McDole for spending some time with us. Some interesting stories, some fun, some frivolous ones, but as you could hear clearly, there is some lasting effect. The good old days of the AFL and the 70s version of the NFL, not fully, fond, especially when you get into the relative violence and rough and tumble play of the way the game was played at that point, and frankly, the lasting effects. You heard it in Ron's voice as he remembered some of his past teammates, and frankly, a little bit of shade on the current NFL, and I think that's something that resonates with many players, not just Ron, about sort of coming to grips and coming to closure and some kind of recompense for some of these players who literally gave him the league, what it exists today, their all, and upon the backs of which this multi-billion-dollar industry known as NFL pro football exists and was built. The idea of taking care of some of these players, a lot of these players in their advancing age, and not only the physical but the psychological wounds of directly, frankly, as we've seen, resulting from some of the hard play and the, shall we say, less than modern ways of protecting against. So a wide-ranging conversation there, but we appreciate Ron having it with us. His book, which is published by our friends at University of Nebraska Press, is called The Dancing Bear, My 18 Years in the Trenches of the AFL and NFL. It is co-written with Rob Morris and the foreword by George Flint, and it is a fun read, and you will enjoy it, especially if you grew up watching Ron and friends either with the Bills or the Redskins or a couple of those teams prior to his getting solidified as a full-time first stringer in both of the leagues of AFL and NFL. All right, thank you so much for listening. We always appreciate your commentary and your suggestions. By all means, visit us early and often at our website. That's goodseatsstillavailable.com. It is there you will find all of the links that you need to deal with us on an ongoing and friendly basis. You will also find our email address, which I'll give you as well. It's hello@goodseatsstillavailable. You can always send us email that way. You'll also find links to our social media connections where we share various things and you can connect with us that way. Twitter You'll find us at Good Seats Still. Instagram, we're at Good Seats Still Available. You will find a Facebook page devoted to us. And we appreciate you doing that. Make sure, of course, you go to our website, too, if you want to buy some of these books or videos or whatever. Click through those links to Amazon or whatever other places. We'll get a little a shekel or two of love along the way. So if you have a choice about where to buy these things, maybe consider going to goodseatsstillavailable.com, searching up whatever episode, such as this one with Ron McDole, and clicking through that way and giving us a little bit of love to help us keep our lights on and roof covering us. And last but not least, our immense thanks, as always, each and every week. You know him, you love him, you can't live without him. His name, Jerry Payne, the good doctor we call him, and he is the chief cook and bottle washer editorially and production-wise for us at Podfly Productions. And podfly.net is the place to find out more about them and perhaps how they, Podfly Productions, might be able to help you in your podcasting needs. And we thank him and them profusely. All right, and we thank you profusely for listening this long and listening each and every week. Telling your friends, for God's sakes, please do that. And rate and review us if you don't mind, wherever you listen, certainly Apple Podcasts, but anywhere. All that stuff helps us. 5 stars certainly doesn't hurt either. And we thank you in advance for that. All right, my name's Tim. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.